Hi guys, welcome back aboard our 44-foot hurricane damage DIY catamaran project boat. This week's video is sponsored by Incogni, more about them a little bit later. This week we'll resume our efforts where we left off last week. Kind of. I was planning on starting to fare the hull below the waterline this week, but the weather forecast looks much better next week. So this week we will focus on installing the new dripless shaft seals and the flexible couplings for the engines, and I also want to get the new flush skin fittings installed using a hopefully useful 3D printed contraption. In fact, there will be no less than three 3D printed contraptions in this video. These two are my design and this is my friend's Klaus' design. They serve different purposes. My two contraptions here are for installing the flushed skin fittings, and Klaus's is for giving us a nice flat surface to install a depth sounder on. We might be going into over-engineering territory here. This could have been solved with just a grinder, but there are three parts in my contraption here. There is this part, which is a center locating pin. Then there is this guy, which is a guide for drilling a hole through the hull. And then there's this guy, which acts as a guide for removing the excess material to leave the skin fitting sitting flush. Klaus's contraption also consists of three parts. There is this threaded nut on there, and then there is this flexible sleeve in TPU. Klaus's contraption will help us with this hole here. This is from an old depth sounder, and we want to reuse it for the new depth sounder because it's the right diameter and it's a good location for it. The only problem is, where this is located, the hull is very curved. That is annoying because the depth sounder won't be able to sit flush against the hull. We could of course fill this up with Sikaflex or something, but that's not a nice way of doing this. Both of these jobs, the depth sounder and the flush skin fittings, could be achieved without any of these contraptions, but where would the fun be in not overthinking something? And just to illustrate what my contraption does, this hole is an old through-hull hole that we want to reuse, and we want to install that flush skin fitting. So we need to remove a little bit of material. I want that hole to be exactly centered on the other hole so we don't remove any unnecessary material. This little end fits exactly into this hole, and then this outer ring here gets located exactly on the center of the hole, and I can use this as a guide for the material I need to remove. Where it makes sense to make jigs like these is of course somewhere where you need to do the same thing over and over again. Now, I have 5 through holes I need to fix, so it'll be nice to have my little jig for that. And also Klaus's contraption I think is going to help him back in Denmark with some of his boat projects. So we're not completely overboard here. There is a slight bit of method to the madness. The upcoming fairing of the hull below the waterline is not something I'm looking forward to. I've done it before, I know what's involved, it's hot, back-breaking work. The mere thought of it is horrifying, yet not as horrifying as the thought of the risk to your personal information on the internet. This was a super smooth segue into the sponsor of this week's video, Incogni. Unfortunately, using the internet in any way, shape or form means that your personal information is scattered all over the place. And as data breaches become more and more common, your personal information is at risk. Part of the problem is that data brokers will get their hands on your personal information and then sell it for a profit. And through that process, your personal information can end up in the hands of all kinds of people. There are many problems with this. For instance, in the US, there are dedicated people search websites that specialize in aggregating all the data they can find on every single person and then making that available on the internet. They make a profit off of giving away your sensitive information, potentially to people with bad intentions. There are countless examples of how this can be annoying or even downright harmful. For instance, huge loans have been taken out in people's names without them even knowing. Or we're all familiar with the scourge of the 21st century that are robocalls. The good news is, you have the right to ask that your information be removed. But doing that manually could take you years. This is where Incogni can help. Incogni will reach out to the data brokers on your behalf and request that your personal information be removed. All you have to do is to create an account, grant Incogni the right to work on your behalf, and then sit back and watch them do the work. They'll even deal with any objections on your behalf, and they'll keep you up to date on the progress on the dashboard. Take your personal data back with Incogni. Use the code SAILLIFE or go to incogni.com/saillife to get 60% off the annual plan. Incogni has a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there is no risk in trying them out. Thank you so much to Incogni for sponsoring this week's video. I prepped the hull with 80 grit sandpaper. I picked up some of these sanding doohickeys to prep inside of the hole, as it seems like they will get a little bit of epoxy up there. Klaus showed up during his lunch break to be a part of the inaugural flight of his contraption. After a couple of coats of wax, we sprayed 3 coats of PVA, which took forever to dry in the humid Florida climate, hence the fan. While we were waiting for the last coat to dry, we mixed up some epoxy and thickened that with a little bit of milled fibers and some silica to keep it from sagging. You could design a version of this contraption that would make it usable by one person, but in its current version, having one person on the outside of the boat and another person on the inside of the boat is the only way to fly. I think this looks really promising, and there's way more of a gap here along the 2 sides than I thought there was going to be. Unfortunately, before we get to the fun part of using my contraption, there's going to be a bunch of legwork. We need to do some grinding. What we have today is a hull with a backing plate on the back of it to get some thickness to the hull, and that backing plate is just smushed on there with some kind of goop. Because I'm going to remove a chunk of the hull to have room for the flush skin fitting, I'm going to be adding a bit of glass on the inside to compensate for that, and then we'll put a new backing plate on top of the new glass. Keep in mind that I am only removing 4 millimeters of the hull, and it's a very small diameter even on the flanged bit of the skin fitting. So yeah, this should be perfectly fine. There is never a dull day in Boatland. I got here this morning thinking that I would just need to grab a few quick measurements for the steering, and then I could get started working on the hull. The reason I wanted to grab some measurements off of the steering was because the U-joint I ordered a couple of weeks back has shipped ahead of time, so we should get that tomorrow, which means this weekend we might have working steering. This guy is the gearbox that kind of sits in the middle of everything. This goes to the rudders and this goes to the helm. I started out the morning by just cleaning up the threads and making sure that everything is not super corroded and I can actually thread in the bolts I need to bolt everything together. Then I wanted to make sure that I had all of the fasteners I would need to secure each of the gearboxes and everything like that. And that's when I realized that this bolt pattern does not match the bolt pattern in the boat. After a bit of rummaging about, I found this thing, which looks pretty frickin' hit if you ask me. It's badly corroded and somebody has taken a stab at welding some stuff on there to maybe be able to reuse it. But yeah, that goes here, and then this is what actually bolts to the boat. Rather than trying to fix this horrific mess here, I figured it might be easier just to make a new one of these mounting flanges. Your first thought might be the same as mine. It's surely going to be hard to make this contraption here with the locating features, with whatever tools I've got here under the boat. But it turns out these features here, they're not locating features. They're just there to make sure that the fasteners that secure everything kind of sits flush so that this can bolt onto the boat. So all I need to make a replacement for this is to be able to drill 8 holes somewhat precisely. The good thing about aluminum, of course, is that it is like butter. It is super soft. It shouldn't be too hard to transform this guy into this, provided, of course, I can drill those 8 holes somewhat precisely. What makes aluminum so nice is the fact that it's very easy to machine, even if you only have woodworking tools. With the little piece of scrap almost kinda square, I measured the distance between the bolts on the gearbox. I know I said I need to drill 8 holes somewhat precisely, but in reality it's just these 4 ones that matter. I realized that the holes on the old mounting flange were in pretty good shape and that I could use that as a template. I couldn't do the same for the 4 outside holes, so there I would have to trust my measurement. Almost 108 millimeters seems like an odd measurement until you click the magic button and realize it turns into 4 1/4 inches. Using a little bit of math and a compass, I marked the location of the 4 outside holes on the aluminum. For the big center hole, I figured I would use a hole saw. This one is plenty big, yet it is still way smaller than the old hole. I wonder why they made that hole so big. I've always had pretty good luck with Bosch tools. This is the first time I've been truly disappointed. The drill kept stopping on me. I don't know if it's an overheating protection thing or an anti-kickback feature, but this drill is basically worthless for medium duty stuff like a hole saw in aluminum. Very disappointing. I ended up drilling a bunch of little holes to help out the hole saw and eventually made it through. Before doing anything drastic, I brought my little aluminum art piece into the boat to just double check that everything lines up, and it looked pretty good. Well, she is not perfect, but she fits on the gearbox and she also fits inside of the boat, and she has the same material thickness where it counts, so this should be perfectly fine to get us to North Carolina. I've just realized to be able to install this, the flange here needs to be off and then the gearbox needs to come up from down below. So let's save that for this weekend when I have Klaus here to help me. I am really pleased with the fact that this is a super snug fit. There is 0 wiggle room here. Klaus is swinging by on his lunch break to see if we can get his contraption removed for the depth sounder. So fingers crossed. Klaus crawled inside of the boat and loosened the nut. With 2 light taps, the contraption fell right out thanks to the PVA mold release. Nice! And the flexible TPU sleeve also peeled out without any kind of issue. This thing worked out really well. I mean, I was surprised to see how nice of a finish this left behind. And now we have the absolute perfect little area for the depth sounder to seal against. This was a big success. Tomorrow we're gonna hit the ground running and install 99% of the steering. Unfortunately, UPS has delayed the package with the stupid U-joint, so we can't finish it. But there are 2 things that we can finish. This is a dripless shaft seal, and this is a flexible coupling. This is a very clever little bit of engineering here. This is what's going to keep water out of the boat around the shaft. Works in a really cool way. This shiny bit here with a couple of O-rings in there, you might be able to see, that clamps onto the shaft and spins with the shaft. And then this guy here, the bellows and this carbon ring out here, stays stationary with the boat clamped onto the stern tube. Without something to keep water from getting into the boat around the shaft, the boat would start sinking the instant we put it in the water. There are different ways of achieving this, and I've never actually had this solution before. I've had a different solution where it's it looks the same, but it's a couple of lip seals in here that's actually sealing to the shaft. This guy doesn't have any seals inside of him. The shiny stainless bit has a couple of O-rings, but he spins with the shaft. So what's keeping water out of the boat is this lovely shiny carbon surface up here smushed against the stainless bit. That works because when you install these, you compress them a certain amount, so there's pressure between that shiny ring and this surface here. That is a really cool engineering idea. The big upside to a solution like this is the fact that you don't get any scoring on the shaft. If you have the more traditional version of this where it's a lip seal or something that's sealing against the shaft and the shaft is spinning, then eventually over time you can get some scoring there. With this, well, there's nothing to do that. I mean, this guy is spinning with the shaft, so yeah, no scoring. Unfortunately, these things don't last forever. I think depending on the specific model you have, it's somewhere in between 6 and 10 years, and then you'll have to replace it. But yeah, cool bit of engineering. The other item on the to-do list for this weekend is this flexible coupling. This guy may look a little bit funky, but he's not really that complicated. He sits in between the shaft and the gearbox. There are multiple reasons to install one of these. For instance, he will take up some shock loading. He will also act in kind of a sacrificial way in case something goes horribly wrong. And he will also compensate for a tiny bit of misalignment. But of course, it's better to have everything lined up perfectly. The next morning, before Klaus showed up, I made a little spacer out of some plywood that we would need later on to mount the gearbox that the wheel attaches to. Getting the two missing gearboxes reinstalled in the boat didn't look super complicated, but of course it's a boat, so access is going to be tight and awkward.
Okay. Ja, det er fint nok. Ja, det er by design. Nej.
We shoved Klaus into the giant locker under the cockpit, but because I'm not a complete monster, I did give him my prized possession, the yellow battery-powered fan. This is where the middle gearbox mounts to the boat. We quickly learned that we absolutely need to attach the gearbox to the torque tube before bolting the gearbox in place. After much struggling and effort, it turns out Klaus wasn't alone in the cockpit. Captain Dum-Dum was riding shotgun.
Så prøver vi lige, så kan vi godt sætte flangen på nu.
Det var den falske ende, der vendte opad, bare ligesom FYI.
Var det den falske ende?
Ja, det er ham, der
Ja, det er fuldstændig rigtigt. Det var den for... Nej.
After fixing that little oopsie-daisy, the gearbox was securely bolted in place and attached to the aft torque tube. To install the wheel gearbox, we needed to drill a few holes in a very precise location. We could see the outline of the old holes. That would be a giant help. Now, if you're wondering why we didn't just use the access hatch that's right behind me, that would be a great question to never ask. It definitely wasn't because I only hours later realized that it was there. With the last gearbox bolted in place, we had gotten as far as we could with the steering while still waiting for that new U-joint. So we switched gears, pardon the pun, and started installing the dripless shaft seals. I remember how much I struggled to take the shaft coupling off aboard Obelix, my first boat around 13 years ago. Aboard the catamaran, they came off much easier. Klaus removed the old shaft seal and cleaned up the shaft using a Scotch-Brite pad. While he was marking the position on the stern tube, I gave the shaft coupling a quick clean. As per the instructions, we applied a little bit of soap to the shaft. Now the bellows were easy to get on there and they were a perfect fit on the stern tube. Then it was time for Mr. Shiny Stainless Ring, yet more soap, and it was a little bit of a fiddly process, but he fit on the shaft. In the hopes of easy future removal, Klaus applied a dab of anti-seize to the shaft coupling, and just like that, we were on to the last step, the flexible couplings. Unfortunately, it turns out they were the wrong size. A little bit of a bummer, but everybody makes mistakes, as we have just seen. Captain Dum-Dum is everywhere. While I still had the pleasure of Klaus's company and an extra pair of hands, I decided to get started on the aluminum frame for the solar panels that will go on top of the tool trailer. This was definitely a job that was much easier and more fun with two people, and the result was almost perfect. more about that in an upcoming video. It's been another chaotic week here on the catamaran. I spent all day yesterday after Klaus's help to just weld up the frame for the solar panels, get all these little tabs here welded in place. And yeah, that is now good to go. We've also got the solar panels ready. We're just waiting for the inverter charger, but all of that stuff is stuff for an upcoming video. I never got around to doing what I was actually planning on doing in the beginning of this week, and that was to finish all those through hulls. And there's a good reason for that. One of those was weather. The other was the fact that my much beloved 3M VersaFlow respirator doohickey, it completely died. It had had issues for a while where it would beep angrily at me and then sometimes it would work, but yeah, now it is completely toast. This is my old one. This is the new replacement one, just the blower motor. The battery is still the same old one I had. That was still perfectly fine. This thing was $300, so not exactly cheap, but it is the best respirator doohickey I have ever had. Well, short of it breaking real quick, but you know, like in terms of comfort. Even though I never did get to those through hulls this week, I think we can still, with a little bit of luck, end with a major milestone and on a bit of a high note, because the U-joint I've been waiting for has shown up. So if we can get this attached to the steering, and if this is right, and if Klaus and I installed that gearbox for the wheel in the right spot, well then maybe we can get the steering working. To be able to install the new U-joint and tie all of the steering together, we had to remove the gearbox temporarily. This was definitely a two-person job. Luckily, Jeff came to the rescue and saved the day. Woohoo! Well, guys, we officially have working steering. Couple issues. The wheel is super crooked. That's not a big deal. We need something to sit on here, so we're not going to have to stand up for 700 miles. But yeah, other than that, the steering is working. Everything looks great with the steering inside and outside of the boat. Now, in regards to the flexible couplings, there was a little bit of a shipping mistake, and we got the 910001 instead of the 910002. So I think that can be corrected pretty quick. So yeah. All in all, a great week. The weather next week looks absolutely perfect for getting started on the much dreaded business of fairing the hull below the waterlines. I am not looking forward to that, but it's gotta be done. And while we're doing that, I should also finally be able to get to those under the water through hulls. And that is going to be the end of this week's video. I hope to see all you guys back here aboard the catamaran next week for yet more oh glorious DIY fun. And thank you so much to Incogni for sponsoring this week's video. As always, feel free to leave a comment down below, and don't forget, if you've enjoyed this video, please remember to leave a like. See you!